essay called Briefing Paper. And it's information I've cobbled from Bill Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse, the Roswell Incident, and Extraterrestrials, Friends and Foes by George Andrews. And it's like, if you read these stories separately, individually, the whole point of it kind of gets broken down and scrambled around so you don't really grasp it. But I took all these incidents and strung them together in one coherent piece, so you read it all together, and it tells an incredible story. Eisenhower, allegedly, according to Bill Cooper, Eisenhower had made a deal with the Greys that was completely illegal. It was without the advice and consent of the Congress. It was without the advice and consent of the American people. The American people had no knowledge of it. To this day have no knowledge of it. But if this actually happened, Eisenhower, although he was well-intended, he sold us all out. Because they found out afterwards that the Greys had made the same deal with the Russians. Also that the Greys were collecting human tissue and samples, and they were supposed to give a detailed listing of who it was they were taking samples from. Found out they weren't. And we were to provide them with a base of operation up at the Four Corners area. Hello? Dulce, New Mexico. And at Area 51. Question remains, is like, who's in charge of this country? Who's in charge here? Why did, at the end of Eisenhower's term, why did he warn us about the powers of the industrial military complex? It's scary, it's scary. It goes on that actually it's more the CIA that's involved with the secret government and the secret liaisons with the extraterrestrials. And you have to ask yourself why, only 6 years later, 6 years after the alleged contact with Eisenhower and the extraterrestrials in California, Edwin Norris of the Brookings Institute was one of the people allegedly present at that meeting. The Brookings Institute in 1960 made a recommendation that the scientific community and the religious community would not be able to function with the knowledge of the reality of extraterrestrials. How did they know that? How did he know that? And if they weren't prepared for it, why didn't the Brookings Institute initiate a policy of public education? No, let's keep it secret. Another thing that started throughout the 60s was the expansion of the drug culture. Drugs became a complete epidemic and are to this day. Why? Because to build the bases, to furnish the financing for the bases that the Greys had at Dulce and at Area 51, you couldn't go through the Congress, you couldn't go through the taxpayers. You had to find a completely separate financial base to function these programs. So what do we have? We have the explosion of drugs in this country. We have the United States involved in a war in Southeast Asia, which was where we got most of the opium trade. And where are we today? We're in Afghanistan. Since we've been in Afghanistan, the opium production has increased 500%. Are these wars about what they say they are? So anyway, why Eisenhower would not block Bishop McIntyre's liaison with the church on this issue, but he kind of agreed to it. Next, please. Pleiadians at the Vatican. There's a mind stretch. What Bob Dino talked about with the assessment that he had access to, one of the prime issues that was of greatest concern with the NATO commanders was that one of the alien groups that they knew was operating here was humanoid, just the same as us. They could be wearing a military uniform, could be walking down the halls of the Pentagon, could be walking down the halls of NATO, and nobody would know the difference. That was a needless to say, a security concern. Next, please. Okay, this was Pope Pius